For 24-year-old Clara Evans, kindness wasn't a choice. It was an instinct, etched into her soul by a life that had offered very little of it back. Each day she navigated the greasy floors of the Silver Spoon Diner, balancing plates and a mountain of debt, her smile a fragile shield against the harsh reality of her world. Her every waking moment was a race against time, a race to earn enough for the medicine that kept her little sister alive. She poured coffee, wiped tables, and absorbed the frustrations of strangers, all while her own dreams quietly faded. She had no idea that her every move, every patient sigh, and selfless act was being watched by a man who had the power to shatter her world or rebuild it entirely. A man hidden in plain sight, looking for the one thing his billions couldn't buy. Proof that true character still existed. The Silver Spoon Diner on Oak Street wasn't a place for the glamorous. It was a haven for the hurried, the lonely, and the hungry. A relic of a bygone era with its cracked red vinyl booths and a jukebox that had been stuck on Creedence Clearwater Revival since 1998. The air hung thick with the comforting trinity of frying bacon, stale coffee, and industrial-strength cleaner. For Clara Evans, this place was both her prison and her sanctuary. At 24, Clara possessed a quiet resilience that life had forced upon her. Her chestnut hair was usually pulled back in a practical, slightly frazzled ponytail, and her blue eyes, though often shadowed with fatigue, held a deep well of empathy. She moved through the diner with an economy of motion that spoke of years of practice, her worn-out sneakers squeaking a familiar rhythm on the checkered linoleum. Her shift started at 6 a.m., but her day had begun 2 hours earlier. The first hour was spent at the small, two-bedroom apartment she shared with her younger sister, Lily. Lily was 16 with a smile that could have lit up the city, but her world was confined to a specially equipped bed in their living room. A rare degenerative muscular disorder had been stealing her mobility piece by piece since she was a child. The condition was aggressive, and the experimental treatments that kept it at bay were astronomically expensive. Every dollar Clara earned was a drop in an ocean of medical debt. This morning, like every morning, Clara had carefully administered Lily's medication, helped her with her breathing exercises, and read a chapter from an old fantasy novel. "One day, Clara," Lily had whispered, her voice thin but hopeful, "we'll go see real castles, not just ones in books." One day, Clara had promised, her heart aching with the weight of that simple word. She'd kissed her sister's forehead, leaving Mrs. Gable, their elderly neighbor who checked in on Lily, with a list of instructions before heading out into the pre-dawn chill. The second hour before her shift was spent at a community college, where she was taking an online course in accounting. It was a slow, grueling crawl toward a different life, one where she wasn't constantly one paycheck away from disaster. She listened to lectures on her cracked phone during her bus ride, her mind struggling to absorb concepts of fiscal responsibility while her own finances were a raging tire fire. By the time she tied the starchy white apron around her waist at the Silver Spoon, she had already lived half a day. Her boss, Tony, a burly man with a perpetually grease-stained shirt and a heart of gold, gave her a sympathetic nod. "Rough morning, kid?" "The usual," she replied, forcing a smile as she grabbed her notepad. The morning rush was a blur of chaos. Orders were shouted, coffee was sloshed, and the bell above the door chimed incessantly. Clara was a master of this domain. She remembered regulars' orders without asking, offered a kind word to the lonely old man in booth 4, and expertly navigated the narrow aisle between tables without ever spilling a drop. Around 10 a.m., a man walked in who didn't fit the usual clientele. He wasn't a construction worker on his break or a bleary-eyed student. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with a weathered face and hands that, despite being calloused, looked like they hadn't seen manual labor in a long time. He wore a simple, faded flannel shirt and work-worn jeans. His graying hair was unkempt, and he had the quiet, observant air of someone who was more comfortable watching than being watched. He took the small, wobbly table in the corner, the one everyone else avoided. Clara approached him with her standard, welcoming smile. "Morning. Coffee?" The man looked up, and for a second, his eyes held a surprising intensity. They were a sharp, intelligent gray, and they seemed to see right through her practiced cheerfulness. "Please," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Black." She poured his coffee, leaving him with a menu he didn't even glance at. For the next hour, he just sat there, nursing the single cup of coffee, his gaze drifting around the diner. He watched Tony argue with the bread delivery guy. He watched a young mother struggle to quiet her crying toddler. And most of all, he watched Clara. He watched as she handled a particularly nasty customer, a businessman in a tailored suit who complained his eggs were too runny. Clara didn't argue. She simply apologized, took the plate back, and returned with a freshly cooked meal, all with a calm that bordered on saintly. The businessman left without a tip. Clara cleared the table without a flicker of annoyance. He watched as she noticed the struggling young mother and discreetly brought over a small bowl of whipped cream with a cherry on top for the toddler, who instantly stopped crying. The mother mouthed a heartfelt, "Thank you," her eyes filled with relief. The man in the corner saw it all. He wasn't just passing time, he was studying her. And Clara, rushing between the kitchen and the front of the house, with Lily's face and a mountain of bills swimming in her mind, had no idea she was the subject of the most important examination of her life. The quiet man in the corner became a semi-regular fixture. He'd appear 2 or 3 times a week, always taking the same wobbly table, always ordering a single black coffee that he'd nurse for over an hour. Clara started calling him Mr. Corner in her head. He never said much beyond please and thank you, but his presence was oddly grounding in the daily whirlwind of the diner. One particularly grueling Tuesday, the storm clouds that had been gathering outside finally broke, unleashing a torrential downpour. The diner quickly filled with people seeking refuge, their wet coats and umbrellas making the floor a treacherous slip and slide. The kitchen was backed up, Tony was yelling, and Clara was moving at double speed, her hair sticking to her forehead with sweat and humidity. It was during this peak chaos that Mr. Henderson came in. Mr. Henderson was a real estate developer who considered the silver spoon his personal fiefdom. He was arrogant, demanding, and notoriously cheap. He snapped his fingers to get attention and treated the staff like his personal servants. Today, he was in a fouler mood than usual, barking his order at Clara without making eye contact. "Steak, medium rare. Don't burn it this time. And my coffee better be hot." Clara just nodded. "Right away, Mr. Henderson." She was rushing back with a full tray, Mr. Henderson's steak, a family's order of pancakes and 3 milkshakes, when a kid darted out from a booth, directly into her path. Clara twisted her body at an impossible angle to avoid him, but the momentum was too much. The tray tilted precariously. She managed to save the plates, but a full glass of ice water went flying, landing squarely on Mr. Henderson's lap. The diner fell silent. The businessman shot up from his seat, his face a mask of purple fury. "You clumsy idiot," he roared, droplets of water dripping from his expensive trousers. "Look what you've done. This is a $2,000 suit. Are you completely incompetent?" Clara's face went pale. "Mr. Henderson, I am so sorry. A child ran out." "I don't care about some brat." He cut her off, his voice echoing through the stunned diner. "I'm going to have you fired. I'll sue this dump for every penny it's worth." Tears pricked at Clara's eyes, a hot mix of humiliation and frustration. Tony started to emerge from the kitchen, but Clara gave him a subtle shake of her head. She grabbed a handful of napkins and began dabbing at the man's trousers. Her head bowed. "I'm very sorry, sir. The meal is on the house, of course. We can pay for the dry cleaning. Please, let me get you some towels." From the corner table, the quiet man, Alexander Sterling, watched the scene unfold with an unreadable expression. He saw the genuine remorse on Clara's face, not of an employee scared of losing her job, but of a person who genuinely regretted causing someone discomfort, even if he was a brute. He saw her protect her boss from the confrontation. He saw her dignity as she absorbed the man's verbal abuse without a single retort. Mr. Henderson eventually stormed out, vowing retribution. The diner slowly returned to its normal hum, but the tension lingered. Clara retreated to the kitchen for a moment, taking a deep, shaky breath before plastering her smile back on and returning to her tables. An hour later, as the lunch rush subsided, the man in the corner finally stood up to leave. He walked to the front counter where Clara was ringing up an order. He placed a crumpled $10 bill on the counter for his $2 coffee. "Keep the change," he said, his gravelly voice softer than usual. "Oh, that's..." That's too much, sir. You don't have to, she said, flustered. He simply looked at her, his gray eyes holding hers for a moment. Yes, I do. He turned and walked out into the rain. As Clara picked up the bill, she noticed something underneath it. It was a business card, plain white with simple black text. It didn't have a name, just a company, Sterling Holdings, Inc., and a phone number. On the back, written in a surprisingly elegant script, were 3 words: "Integrity is priceless." Clara stared at the card, a strange feeling washing over her. She didn't know who the man was or what Sterling Holdings was. To her, it was just a small, unexpected act of kindness at the end of a terrible hour. She tucked the card into her apron pocket, thinking it was a nice gesture and nothing more. She had no way of knowing that the incident with Mr. Henderson wasn't an accident. It was a meticulously crafted test, and she had just passed the first part with flying colors. Alexander Sterling, the reclusive billionaire CEO of Sterling Holdings, got into the back of a discreet black sedan, waiting a block away, and made a phone call. "She's the one," he said into the phone. "Proceed to phase 2. Life for Clara continued its relentless march. The card from the quiet man in the corner remained tucked in her wallet, a small, curious memento from a strange day. She had Googled Sterling Holdings Inc. once during a study break and had been stunned to see it was a massive, multinational conglomerate with interests in tech, real estate, and finance. The CEO was a man named Alexander Sterling, but the few photos available online were old and grainy. She dismissed it as a coincidence. Maybe the man worked there, a kindly janitor or something. The idea that he was anything more was too far-fetched to contemplate. Mr. Corner, as she still thought of him, continued his visits. He never mentioned the incident with Mr. Henderson or the card he'd left. He just sat, watched, and drank his coffee. His presence became a strange sort of comfort. He was a silent witness to her daily struggles, and in a life where she often felt invisible, that somehow mattered. He saw her slip a bag of day-old muffins to a homeless man who often huddled by the diner's back door, speaking to him not with pity, but with the casual warmth of an equal. He saw her spend 15 minutes of her unpaid break helping an elderly woman figure out the new bus schedule on her phone. He saw her patiently explaining the menu for the 10th time to a group of indecisive teenagers, her smile never wavering. Each act was a small thread, weaving a tapestry of character that Alexander Sterling was observing with rapt attention. He had spent the last year since his wife Eleanor's death adrift in a sea of meaningless wealth. Everyone around him wanted something. His board members wanted higher profits. His distant relatives wanted handouts. His employees offered fawning, insincere praise. He was starving for something genuine. Eleanor had always said, "You find a person's real worth in the small, unwatched moments." So he had started watching. He visited cafes, libraries, and parks, searching for someone who lived by the values his wife had cherished. In Clara, he was beginning to see Eleanor's words made manifest. But as Alexander's conviction grew, the cracks in Clara's life were widening into chasms. Lily had a bad turn. A respiratory infection landed her in the hospital for a week, a terrifying ordeal that left her weaker and their finances in utter ruin. The new medication recommended by the specialist was experimental and, of course, not covered by their minimal insurance. The initial cost was a staggering $50,000. The number was so large it seemed unreal. It was a brick wall Clara had run into at full speed. She picked up extra shifts, forgoing her classes. She started working weekends as a cleaner for a small office building downtown. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. The exhaustion was a physical weight, settling deep into her bones. The shadows under her eyes became permanent fixtures. Tony saw the change. "Clara, you're going to burn yourself out," he said one evening, forcing her to sit down with a bowl of soup. "You need to rest." "I can't, Tony," she whispered, her voice cracking. "If I stop, I lose her. It's that simple." Her desperation was a palpable thing. The bright spark of hope in her eyes was dimming, replaced by the dull glint of fear. It was precisely this vulnerability that Phase 2 of Alexander's plan was designed to test. One afternoon, a woman walked into the diner. She was the polar opposite of its usual patrons. She wore a sharp, tailored gray suit. Her silver hair was cut in a severe, elegant bob, and she carried a leather briefcase. She scanned the room until her eyes landed on Clara. "Are you Clara Evans?" the woman asked, her voice crisp and professional. "Yes. Can I help you?" "My name is Miss Davies. I'm a recruitment consultant." She slid a pristine business card across the counter. "I have a client who is looking for a junior administrative assistant. The role is simple: filing, scheduling, data entry. The salary is $75,000 a year, full medical and dental benefits included." Clara froze. The number seemed to hang in the air, shimmering like a mirage. $75,000. It was more than double what she made now. It was Lily's medicine. It was a way out. It was a lifeline. "Me," Clara stammered, "but I don't have a degree. My only experience is this." "My client values work ethic and integrity above all else," Ms. Davies said smoothly, her eyes unblinking. "We've been observing potential candidates for some time. You come highly recommended for your diligence and interpersonal skills. The position starts immediately. We would need you to give your notice here today." Today, the word hit Clara like a punch to the gut. Leave Tony? Now? During the busiest season, with his wife recovering from surgery and him barely keeping his head above water? Tony had given her this job when no one else would. He'd let her adjust her schedule for Lily's appointments. He'd advanced her pay more times than she could count. He was family. Her mind was a battlefield. One side screamed at her, "Take it. This is your miracle. It's for Lily." The other side whispered about loyalty, about leaving a good man in a lurch, about the debt she owed him that wasn't monetary. She looked over at Tony, who was sweating over the grill, his face a mask of concentration. She thought of his kindness, his unwavering support. Then she thought of Lily, her fragile breaths in the sterile hospital room. The choice was tearing her apart. Ms. Davies watched her, a slight, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. The offer was deliberately designed to be too good to refuse, and the time pressure was meant to force a selfish decision. From his corner table, hidden behind a newspaper, Alexander Sterling held his breath. This was the true test. Kindness to strangers was one thing, but loyalty when your own world was burning down, that was something else entirely. Clara took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked Ms. Davies directly in the eye. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "It's an incredible offer, but I can't accept." Ms. Davies raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "May I ask why? An opportunity like this is unlikely to come again." "My boss, he needs me," Clara said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth, even as she knew they were the right ones. "I can't just walk out on him. Not now. It wouldn't be right." Ms. Davies stared at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "I see. Well, the offer stands for 24 hours if you change your mind." She stood, smoothed her suit, and walked out of the diner without another word. Clara felt a wave of nausea. Had she just made the biggest mistake of her life? She had chosen loyalty over her sister's future. The thought was a dagger in her heart. She rushed to the restroom and splashed cold water on her face, fighting back tears of regret and turmoil. In the corner, Alexander Sterling lowered his newspaper. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He'd found her. He'd really found her. The rejection of the job offer haunted Clara for days. Every time she looked at the growing pile of medical bills on her kitchen table, a voice in her head screamed, "You fool!" She had chosen abstract loyalty over a concrete solution, and the weight of that choice was crushing. The $75,000 salary replayed in her mind, a ghost of a life she could have had, a life where she could sleep at night without the specter of debt looming over her. She tried to push through, working with a feverish intensity as if to punish herself for the decision. She took on even more hours, covering shifts for sick colleagues, staying late to mop the floors, coming in early to prep the coffee station. Her world shrank to the four walls of the diner and the quiet, tense atmosphere of the apartment. Her online classes were completely abandoned. There was simply no time, no energy. Lily's condition remained precarious. She was home from the hospital, but she was weaker than before. The doctor's words echoed in Clara's mind. "The new treatment offers the best chance, Clara. Without it, we're just managing a decline. The phrase managing a decline was a clinical, sterile way of saying she was watching her sister fade away. The first notice arrived a week later. It was a formal letter from the hospital's billing department, printed in an unforgivingly bold font. Final notice: payment of $50,000 is due immediately to begin the recommended treatment protocol for patient Lily Evans. Failure to remit payment will result in the cancellation of the treatment plan. Clara read the letter 3 times, but the words wouldn't change. Cancellation of the treatment plan. It sounded like a death sentence. She sank onto her worn-out sofa, the letter trembling in her hand. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She felt like she was drowning. The air in the small apartment suddenly too thin to breathe. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by Lily's bedside, watching the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of her chest. In the dim light of the moon filtering through the window, Lily looked so fragile, so innocent. Clara's heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. She had failed her. Her hard work meant nothing. Her integrity meant nothing. In the real world, money was the only thing that mattered, and she didn't have any. The next day at the diner, she was a ghost of herself. The practiced smile was gone, replaced by a tight, strained mask. Tony noticed immediately. "Clara, what is it? Talk to me," he pleaded, pulling her aside near the kitchen. She finally broke. The dam of her composure burst, and she told him everything. The hospital, the $50,000, the final notice, the feeling of utter hopelessness. The tears she had been holding back for weeks streamed down her face. Tony listened, his own face etched with worry. He was a good man, but he was barely keeping the diner afloat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his worn leather wallet. He took out all the cash he had, a little over $200, and pressed it into her hand. "It's not much, kid, but it's yours, for whatever it's worth." The gesture, so kind and so painfully inadequate, only made Clara cry harder. "Thank you, Tony," she sobbed, "but it's not enough. It's never enough." Alexander Sterling, seated in his usual corner, observed this exchange from a distance. He couldn't hear the words, but he could read the language of despair in Clara's posture, the way her shoulders slumped in defeat. He saw Tony's act of kindness and Clara's heartbroken reaction. His plan was working, but seeing her pain was more difficult than he had anticipated. This final stage was crucial, but it was also cruel. He had to know with absolute certainty what she would do when she was standing on the very edge of the abyss, with no hope in sight. He waited until late in the afternoon, when the diner was nearly empty. Clara was clearing tables, her movements slow and mechanical. Alexander finished his coffee, stood up, and walked to the counter to pay. He placed a $5 bill on the counter for his coffee. "Tough day," he said, his voice gentle. It was the most he'd ever said to her. Clara looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. She just nodded, unable to form words. He gave a slight, sympathetic nod in return and walked out. A few minutes later, Clara went to clear his corner table. As she picked up the empty coffee cup, her eyes fell upon something left on the seat of the booth. It was a wallet, a thick, worn, brown leather wallet. Her first instinct was to call out, but the man was already gone. With trembling hands, she picked it up. It was heavy. She glanced around the empty diner. Tony was in the back, on the phone with a supplier. She was alone. Curiosity and a sudden, dark impulse warred within her. She opened it. Her breath caught in her throat. The wallet was stuffed with cash, $100 bills, a thick, dense stack of them. She quickly thumbed through a section of it. There had to be thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Tucked into one of the slots was a simple blank ID card with no photo or name. It was completely untraceable. This wasn't a solution. It was a miracle, a dangerous, terrifying miracle. The $50,000 she needed was right here in her hands. An anonymous wallet, an untraceable owner. No one would ever know. She could walk out of the diner, go straight to the hospital, pay the bill, and save Lily's life. It would be that easy. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The diner, once her sanctuary, now felt like a courtroom. Every shadow seemed to be watching her. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded like a bomb. This was the answer to her prayers delivered by a cruel and tempting twist of fate. All she had to do was take it. She thought of Lily's smile. She thought of the doctor's grim prognosis. Then she thought of her own reflection in the mirror. The tired eyes, the worn-out expression. Who was she? Was she the person who took the easy way out? The person who stole, even when faced with an impossible choice? The money in the wallet felt like it was burning her hands. She stood there, frozen in the corner of the empty diner, holding a stranger's fortune and the entire weight of her sister's life, battling the biggest temptation she had ever known. The silence of the diner pressed in on Clara. The wad of cash in the wallet felt impossibly heavy, a tangible representation of her desperation. The voice of temptation was deafening. Take it. It's fate. It's for Lily. No one will ever know. The man is gone. For a dizzying minute, she almost succumbed. She pictured herself walking into the hospital admissions office, slamming the cash down on the counter, the look of relief on the administrator's face, the call to the doctor to schedule Lily's first treatment. It was all so close, a forbidden fruit within her grasp. She closed the wallet with a snap, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Her hands were shaking violently. She squeezed her eyes shut, and an image of her mother, who had passed away years ago, flashed in her mind. Her mother had always told her, "Clara, we may not have much, but we have our name. We have our honesty. That's the one thing no one can ever take from you unless you give it away." Her breath came out in a shuddering gasp. She couldn't do it. She couldn't become a person her mother would be ashamed of, a person she herself would despise every time she looked in the mirror. Saving Lily was everything, but it couldn't come at the cost of her own soul. With newfound resolve, she clutched the wallet and ran to the front door, peering out into the still raining street. The quiet man was nowhere in sight. He had a 10-minute head start at least. He could be anywhere. "Tony!" she yelled, her voice high with urgency. "I have to go. Something's happened. I'll be back as soon as I can." Before Tony could even reply, she was out the door, her thin apron no match for the drenching rain. She didn't know where she was going. The man had just walked out. He couldn't have gotten far. He was older, and he walked with a steady, unhurried pace. She scanned the street, left or right. She took a gamble and ran to the right, toward the bus stop at the end of the block. Her sneakers slapped against the wet pavement. Rain plastered her hair to her face and soaked through her thin uniform. People on the sidewalk stared at the frantic waitress running through the downpour, clutching a wallet like her life depended on it. In a way, it did. She reached the bus stop, her chest heaving. She scanned the faces of the people huddled under the shelter. He wasn't there. A bus was just pulling away from the curb. Had he gotten on it? Despair began to creep back in. This was a fool's errand. The city was huge. Finding one anonymous man was impossible. But then she saw him. Across the street, half a block down, the man was just turning a corner onto a quieter side street, Market Avenue. Adrenaline surged through her. Without thinking, she darted into the street, earning a furious honk from a taxi that screeched to a halt just inches from her. She ignored it, her eyes locked on the corner he had just rounded. She ran faster, her lungs burning. She rounded the corner onto Market Avenue, a narrow street lined with old brick buildings and law offices. And there he was, walking slowly, seemingly oblivious. "Sir!" she screamed, her voice hoarse. "Sir, wait!" He stopped and turned around slowly. His expression was calm, almost expectant. As she ran up to him, breathless and dripping wet, he simply watched her, his gray eyes unreadable. She couldn't speak for a moment, just gasped for air, leaning over with her hands on her knees. She held up the wallet. You forgot this," she panted, straightening up. "In the diner, on the seat." He looked from her drenched, exhausted face down to the wallet in her hand. He didn't seem surprised or even particularly relieved. He just nodded. "So I did," he said, his voice that same low rumble. There's a lot of money in here," she said, her voice still shaky. "You should be more careful." He took the wallet from her outstretched hand. He didn't open it or check the contents. He just slid it into the pocket of his jacket. "The money is replaceable," he said, his gaze intense. "What you just did is not." Clara just stared at him, confused by his cryptic words and his strange calm. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the chilling cold of her wet clothes. I have to get back to work, she mumbled, starting to back away. Wait, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a command that made her stop. Clara Evans. My name is Alexander Sterling. The name hit her like a physical blow. Sterling. Sterling Holdings, Inc., the business card. It wasn't a coincidence. This quiet, unassuming man in a flannel shirt was one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the country. Her mind struggled to reconcile the image of the billionaire from the news with the man standing in front of her. It didn't make sense. I don't understand, she whispered. You will, he said. A sleek black sedan pulled up silently beside them, the window rolling down to reveal the severe, elegant face of Miss Davies, the woman who had offered her the job. Miss Davies looked at Clara's soaked uniform and exhausted face, then at Alexander. Is everything in order, sir? Everything is perfect, Catherine, Alexander replied. He then turned his full attention back to Clara. Please, get in the car, Clara. It's time we had a real conversation. And I promise you, by the end of it, you will never have to worry about the rain again. Clara stood frozen on the sidewalk, rain dripping from her ponytail, her mind reeling. She looked from the billionaire to his associate in the luxury car, and back again. She had just passed a test she never knew she was taking, and the life she knew, the life of a struggling waitress in the Silver Spoon Diner, was already over. She just hadn't realized it yet. The ride in the back of the sedan was a surreal, silent journey. Clara sat on the plush leather seat, acutely aware of the water pooling around her worn-out sneakers. She was wrapped in a soft cashmere blanket that Miss Davies, Catherine, had produced from a compartment, but she was still shivering, less from cold and more from shock. Alexander Sterling sat opposite her, watching her with a thoughtful expression. He hadn't said a word since they had gotten in the car. They drove downtown to the heart of the financial district, pulling up in front of a skyscraper made of black glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. The words Sterling Tower were emblazoned in discreet silver letters above the grand entrance. Please come with me, Alexander said as the driver opened her door. Walking through the lobby was like entering another world. The floors were polished marble, the air was silent and smelled faintly of leather and success, and people in immaculate suits moved with quiet purpose, their gazes flicking curiously toward the soaking wet waitress being escorted by the company's legendary founder. They took a private elevator that shot upwards with stomach-lurching speed. There were no buttons. Alexander simply placed his thumb on a small scanner, and the doors whispered shut. They opened again on what seemed to be the top floor of the building. It wasn't an office. It was a sprawling, beautifully furnished penthouse suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the entire city, shrouded in rain clouds below them. Please sit, Alexander said, gesturing to a comfortable-looking armchair. Catherine, could you please arrange for some dry clothes for Miss Evans? And some tea. As Catherine left, Clara sank into the chair, feeling small and out of place. Mr. Sterling, I don't understand any of this. The diner, the wallet, the job offer. Alexander stood by the vast window looking down at the city. A little over a year ago, I lost my wife, Eleanor, he began, his voice softer now, filled with a raw grief that felt jarringly intimate. She was the heart of my world. She grew up with nothing, much like you. She believed that a person's true wealth wasn't in their bank account, but in their character. She used to say, money can build a house, but only integrity can build a home. He turned to face Clara, his gray eyes filled with a profound sadness. After she was gone, I looked around at my life, at this empire I'd built, and I felt empty. I was surrounded by people who agreed with everything I said, who wanted a piece of my fortune. There was no honesty, no integrity. I started to wonder if the world Eleanor believed in even existed anymore. He walked over and sat in the chair opposite her. So I started an experiment. I wanted to find someone who embodied the values she held so dear. Someone who was kind when no one was watching, loyal when it was easier to be selfish, and honest when they had every reason not to be. I started looking for one good person. The pieces began to click into place in Clara's mind. The puzzle of the last few weeks was assembling itself into a picture so incredible it was difficult to believe. The diner, she whispered. Was my first stop, he confirmed. And then I saw you. I saw you handle that obnoxious businessman, who I should mention is a highly paid actor from my marketing department named Robert Henderson, with grace and professionalism. He was instructed to be as awful as possible. Clara's jaw dropped. Mr. Henderson was an actor? Then came the job offer, Alexander continued. Catherine Davies is my chief legal counsel. The offer was real, but the condition that you had to leave your boss high and dry immediately was the test. We wanted to see if you would trade your loyalty for financial security. You chose loyalty. I was deeply impressed. He paused as Catherine returned with a tray of tea and a neatly folded pile of clothes. Clara accepted them numbly. And today, Alexander said, his voice dropping, was the final test, the most difficult one. I knew about your sister, Clara. I'm sorry to say, my resources allow me to be very thorough. I knew about the hospital bills, the final notice. I knew you were at your breaking point. The wallet, the cash. I put you in an impossible position. I needed to know what you would do when you were standing at the edge of despair, with a choice between your survival and your principles. He leaned forward, his expression deadly serious. You ran through a storm, Clara. You chased down a stranger to return a fortune you desperately needed. In that moment, you proved that my wife was right. People like you still exist. Tears were streaming down Clara's face now, but they weren't tears of sadness or fear. It was a release of weeks of pent-up tension, confusion, and a dawning, overwhelming sense of disbelief. But why? She managed to ask. Why go to all this trouble for me? Because I'm not offering you a handout, Clara. I'm offering you a partnership, he said. Eleanor left behind a significant portion of her estate to establish a charitable foundation, the Eleanor Sterling Foundation for Families in Crisis. Its mission is to provide direct, immediate financial aid to families crushed by medical debt, to cut through the red tape that people like you face every day. But the foundation has been dormant. It needed a director, someone with empathy, integrity, and first-hand knowledge of the struggle. It needs someone who can't be bought, who understands the value of a dollar, but values human dignity more. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of hope in his own eyes. I'm asking you to run it, Clara. I want you to be the director of the foundation. You will have a staff, a significant budget, and the autonomy to help people. Your starting salary will be, let's say, substantially more than the one Miss Davies offered you. And your first act as director, if you accept, will be to approve a grant for the full, immediate, and ongoing medical care of a young woman named Lily Evans. The world tilted on its axis. Clara couldn't breathe. Director, foundation, Lily's care. The words swirled around her, a symphony of hope she had never dared to imagine. She looked at this powerful, grieving man who had orchestrated this bizarre, elaborate test of her character, and she saw not a billionaire, but a man trying to find a reason to believe in the world again. And in her, he had found it. Accepting Alexander's offer was less a decision and more a surrender to a new, terrifying, and exhilarating reality. The morning after her life-altering encounter, Clara stood before the imposing black glass of Sterling Tower, not in a drenched uniform, but in a simple yet professional dress Catherine Davies had arranged for her. She felt like an actress who had been pushed onto the wrong stage. The sheer scale of the building, the quiet hum of immense power emanating from it, was deeply intimidating. For a moment, she felt the powerful urge to turn and run back to the familiar, greasy comfort of the silver spoon. But then an image of Lily's hopeful smile flashed in her mind, and she took a deep breath, pushing through the revolving doors. Her transition from waitress to foundation director was a jarring culture shock. Her new office on the 40th floor was larger than her entire apartment, with a view that made the city look like a toy set. In her first week, she was introduced to a world of board meetings, fiscal projections, and strategic planning sessions. She sat in meetings with sharp, Ivy League-educated executives who spoke in a language of acronyms and bottom lines. The feeling of being an imposter was a constant, heavy cloak. They saw a waitress. She felt like one. The first real test of her new role came during a budget meeting for the foundation. A polished, stern-faced man from the finance department, a Mr. Garrett, presented a proposal for the grant application process. It was a 20-page document filled with complex financial disclosures, background checks, and a multi-tiered review system designed to minimize risk. This protocol ensures fiscal responsibility and protects the foundation from fraudulent claims, Garrett stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Clara's hands grew clammy. This document was the enemy. It was the very wall of bureaucracy that had stood between Lily and her treatment. She saw herself in its cold, impersonal lines. A desperate person who would have been disqualified on page 3 for having a poor credit score. Finding a voice she didn't know she possessed, she spoke up. "Mr. Garrett, how long would it take for a family to complete this application and receive a decision?" Garrett adjusted his glasses. "Best case scenario, with all documentation in order? 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks, Clara repeated softly, the words catching in her throat. My sister was given a final notice. We didn't have 6 to 8 weeks. We didn't have 6 to 8 days. When your child can't breathe, or when the hospital says they're stopping treatment, fiscal responsibility isn't the first thing on your mind. Survival is." She stood up, her heart hammering, and looked around the polished mahogany table at the surprised faces. "I spent a month trying to get a simple copay waiver from our insurance. I had to provide 3 years of tax returns, letters from employers, and proof of every dollar I ever earned, only to be told I made $200 a year too much to qualify. That is the system we are trying to fix, not replicate. Our foundation must be different. It must be built on trust, not suspicion. It must be fast, and it must be human." The room was silent. Alexander Sterling, who had been listening from the head of the table, broke the silence. "Mr. Garrett," he said, his voice calm but firm, "please work with Mrs. Evans to design a new process. Her criteria are now our criteria: trust, speed, humanity. That is the directive." From that moment, no one in the room ever looked at Clara like a waitress again. True to her word, Clara dismantled the corporate approach. She created a one-page application form. She hired case managers with backgrounds in social work, not finance. The first family they helped was a young couple whose son had been diagnosed with a rare cancer. Clara met them herself in the sterile hospital cafeteria. She didn't bring a briefcase. She brought 2 cups of coffee and an open heart. She listened to their story, saw their terror, a mirror of her own, and by the end of the day, the foundation had paid for the specialized treatment their insurance refused to cover. This victory was more satisfying than any tip she had ever earned. Meanwhile, Lily's world was beginning to open up. The new treatments worked wonders. Clara was there for the milestone moments. The first time Lily could wiggle her toes, the day she propelled her new, state-of-the-art wheelchair down the hospital corridor on her own, a grin of pure triumph on her face. Her laughter, once a rare and precious sound, now filled their new accessible apartment, another gift from the foundation, with a light that chased away the last of the shadows. Clara never forgot where she came from. One afternoon, she walked back into the Silver Spoon Diner. Tony, seeing her in her tailored blazer, let out a whoop and pulled her into a hug that smelled of bacon and honest work. "Look at you, kid! A regular big shot!" She smiled, a real, untired smile. "I wanted to say thank you, Tony, for everything." She handed him an envelope. Inside were 2 checks. The first was a grant from the Eleanor Sterling Foundation, designated for small businesses that support their local communities, enough to pay off his debts and renovate the diner. The second was a personal check from her, with a note, "For that vacation you and Maria deserve." Tony stared at the numbers, his gruff exterior crumbling as tears welled in his eyes. "I always knew you were meant for more than this place, Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just didn't know how much more." Her friendship with Alexander deepened. He was no longer the mysterious man in the corner, but a mentor and a confidant. He shared stories of Eleanor, of her fire and her compassion, and Clara felt as if she knew the woman whose legacy she was now building. In turn, Clara kept him grounded, reminding him of the real-world impact of the decisions made from their perch in the sky. A year to the day after she had chased him through the rain, Clara found herself sitting in a booth at the newly renovated Silver Spoon. The cracked vinyl was gone, replaced by comfortable upholstery, But the diner's heart was the same. Across from her, Lily was passionately debating the merits of Gothic versus Romanesque architecture with a smiling Alexander Sterling, her sketchbook open to a detailed drawing of a castle. A new waitress, a young woman with the familiar, tired but hopeful look of a student working her way through college, came to their table. "What can I get for you, folks?" she asked with a friendly smile. Clara ordered for them all, and as the waitress walked away, she felt a profound sense of peace. She saw the entire arc of her journey in that single moment: the desperation, the test of character, the impossible choice, and the incredible reward. Alexander caught her eye and raised his coffee cup in a silent toast, a gesture that now held a universe of shared meaning. He hadn't just given her money, he had given her a purpose that aligned with the person she had always been. He set out searching for one good person to honor his wife's memory, and in doing so, he had empowered her to help hundreds more, creating a living, breathing legacy of kindness that Eleanor Sterling would have loved. The waitress from the Silver Spoon was finally home. Clara's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth isn't measured by our job title or the balance in our bank account, but by the integrity we show when faced with impossible choices. It's about the kindness we offer when we have little to give and the honesty we uphold when no one is watching. In a world that often feels transactional and cold, a single act of character can create ripples that change everything. Alexander Sterling had all the money in the world, but he knew the most valuable investment he could ever make was in people. If this story of hope, integrity, and unexpected transformation touched your heart, please help us share it with others. Smash that like button to let us know it resonated with you. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that good things happen to good people. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will inspire and uplift you. What would you have done if you found that wallet? Let us know in the comments below.